every other industry is experiencing some level of growth because of creators. Moving into carbonated soft drinks or moving into professional sports, you've proven that that is actually quite a driver. So if people are wondering, is this going to be here for some time, the creator economy? I can vouch for what you say, which is absolutely that's the case.
Explore the minds and marketing strategies behind today's winning brands and businesses. Tap into the power of the creator economy with Earned by CreatorIQ. Here's Conor Begley.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Earned. Today I've got Doug Jensen, the SVP of Data and Analytics, focused on marketing at Estee Lauder. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thanks, Conor. Great to be here.
And Doug and I have known each other for a decade now.
Indeed,
which
a decade.
Is kind of shocking. It makes me feel a little old inside. I don't know why.
Well, I already am old, so that's fine.
Well, you don't look it, so that's good. Well, for those that don't know, I would love to, and the other thing that's special about this episode is Doug is only the second person we've had on. We're on 150 episodes now.
That's crazy.
That's ever repeated, so welcome back.
First, it's crazy you have 150 episodes, and it's crazy that I'm one of the few people you've asked back. I'm very privileged.
I mean, well earned would be the right way to say it. Well, just for those that don't know, I'd love for you to give people a quick background on both, one, kind of what your careers looked like, how you got here, just for those that might want to follow a similar path. And then second, what you kind of focus on, because I think that will provide context for the rest of the questions we ask.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in the marketing analytics field for 35 years, believe it or not. I started at Nielsen, which is now Nielsen IQ, and I was in Chicago working in a cubicle and running economic models, econometric models, and I didn't actually know at the time what they were, but they were marketing mix models. So I've been doing that kind of analytic work for my entire career. Worked at Nielsen Information Resources, which is now part of Circana, then went in-house at Avon Products, where I led a global team that just delivered marketing mix models to the international markets. And then for the past 11 years at Estee Lauder Companies. I was hired and brought into the company to build a host of analytic capabilities, including marketing mix modeling. And that's the work that I feel the most passionate about, and I think is sometimes underappreciated in the industry. And I actually am at a couple conferences recently where it's being talked about favorably again. And that is something we should talk about today. In large part, that's because it is using a type of technique where you can measure anything, any marketing variable, and you can measure it using aggregated data. And so it avoids those issues with, iOS or Google, where we're going to see less ability to look at individual consumer behavior. Marketing mix models don't rely on individual behavior data. So for the way that we think about this, and the MMM for short, we've been using it really from the beginning, going back when I first met you 10 years ago, to really understand the importance of creator and influencer marketing. We used it and we use it to measure its impact on not only sales, but upper funnel and mid funnel activities. So we'll talk about that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, one, like you said, the privacy changes on iOS and other platforms have made it harder to connect those dots. I think separately, attribution is a messy business anyways, right? Like, I see something today, I don't necessarily immediately take an action. I also don't necessarily take an action online, right? I might take an action offline. And in some ways, I think that the measurability of digital advertising has also pushed a lot of people kind of to focus down funnel on things that are directly attributable to sales, right? In that closed loop system.
Indeed.
Which I think in a lot of ways, marketing mix allows you to get out of that cycle, right?
Yeah, it really does. It allows you to review brand versus performance marketing. And as many people listening to this will know, that's the big debate within CMOs still today, is how much money should I spend in brand marketing, which is typically going to be upper and middle funnel, and how do I get away from the pitfall of only spending in performance marketing because it has been so trackable. So the way that we have used MMMs at our company, actually, let me tell you a story about what was happening working with your data using EMV, or earned media value, as an input measure, which, as people know, is, and as you well teach, is a measure of consumer engagement, of how consumers are responding to influencer content about brands, right? So EMV is a measure on its own that we've been tracking for some time, but it's not the business outcome measure. So we were first looking for a relationship of EMV and how it related to sales. And that's the only thing we were doing, let's say, 5-7 years ago. And what we were finding is we were not able to detect a very significant relationship, and that just seemed odd. Obviously, we know that influencer marketing will drive sales, but that's not the first intent in many ways when you're working with an influencer, right? So we embarked on a multi-stage marketing mix model approach where we have three models. We have a desirability model, which represents upper funnel. We have a middle funnel model, which represents traffic, and a bottom of the funnel, which is sales. And when we went to this new multi-stage approach, what we were first looking for is, does influencer marketing or creator content drive people to desire a brand? So if Clinique, for example, runs a campaign with an influencer, does it drive people to go, in the KPI that we use is Google search volume. So do people go to Google and type Clinique as a brand name into that search engine when that campaign is happening? And the reason why we use that measure of desirability and not awareness is that many brands in the beauty industry don't have a problem with awareness. Most consumers know Clinique, they know Lancome, they know Estee Lauder. The problem isn't that. The problem is just below that, in my view, which I call desirability. So once we moved to this new approach and we were able to say, hey, this influencer campaign did drive people to go and search more often for Clinique, then we actually connected it to, then do people come to the Clinique.com website, and do they not make a sale yet? In the middle funnel, we're looking for, did they actually come to the site, register or not register, and look at the content there, and then finally, do they drive sales, both on brand.com as well as through our wholesaler and retailer partners? And it was only by going through this three-step approach were we able to measure influencer marketing correctly. It continues to be one of the top factors for most brands in the beauty industry, but the challenge I think that brands have is, unless you're looking for the effects at the right way that they're intended, you're going to misrepresent what you're seeing. And I think that measurement challenge is still out there. So I'm an evangelist for this topic, as you know. I love it. It's a sweet spot. It's getting more traction, more interest, and I think a lot of people want to know how to do it appropriately.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that's really interesting in terms of effects that are very difficult to measure is if you were to look at, let's say, the hair care category, where you have something like K18 or Olaplex or whatever, what they found were their top influencers were actually the hairstylists. And what's really interesting about that group of people is if you were to think about a professional hairstylist that has 100,000 fans, well, who are those people? They're probably other hairstylists, right? And so not only do you have this like kind of delayed effect that you're talking about in terms of it takes time to search, go to the site, check out the site, then purchase, but you also have the who are you influencing on the other side? Because if you're influencing hairstylists, they ultimately touch a lot of other people too.
Indeed.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that this kind of approach, this aggregate approach, works much better for measuring these kinds of activities.
I agree with that. I also think it's not just hair care, right? It's skincare has exploded in, I'll call it the education part of
The numbers are wild.
the engagement, right? And
Yeah.
as you have published for years, it really took off during the pandemic when people weren't wearing makeup anymore. They were taking care of their skin and their hair, but the education of how to apply skincare was important. So it went from less about the look and more about what's the right product for my skin, but what's the right regimen that I should be using, and how do we make sure that we teach every age cohort the right way to do that. And some young girls, some Gen Alpha, are using skincare that they shouldn't be using. So how do you make sure you're really educating appropriately?
Well, and there's also, obviously, this kind of already happened, but I think it continues, is the desire for transparency around what's in the products as well, right? Like, is this going to be good for me? Is it going to cause problems long term? Am I putting good stuff on my skin? I think that's where the education component becomes more important.
Absolutely. What ingredient is in it? What does that ingredient do? Do I think that ingredient is right for me? All of that is important.
And actually, we probably should have started with this, but just for people that really don't even know what we're talking about, give a very basic overview of what an econometric or a marketing mix model is.
Yeah, so the idea is you're looking for all the marketing factors that will drive an outcome. And then, so an outcome is an explanatory variable. So in the framework that I was describing earlier, one KPI would be Google search. So does a marketing factor, for example, influencer marketing, drive that outcome variable, which is Google search? And so basically, A multivariate regression model, which is a type of econometric model, is looking for that relationship. Now, the key is you have to have data, let's say, across 2 years that's weekly in granularity. And in the case of many beauty brands, you have store or door level data that you can use to measure it. So you're looking across time, and you're basically building a model that's across that 2-year period. Again, so in a middle funnel model, you're looking for, does a marketing factor, for example, influencer marketing, drive people to spend time on a website? And that, we call that a consideration or engagement. And then finally, does a marketing factor cause someone to actually drive that sale? Conversion is the bottom of the funnel. So the field of statistics, which is what I was trained in, is key to a lot of this work. And I would say to anyone who's young and is looking for some kind of analytic path, that looking to understand how models work and even work for a company where you can actually get that experience, which is what I did. I spent the first 15 years of my career at Nielsen and Information Resources building models across clients, across industries to really understand the patterns in data. And then later in my career, applying that to the beauty industry. Whether I'll do that in the beauty industry in the future, I'm not sure, but I think every industry can actually benefit from that. And again, it's important to understand and recognize that earned media value on its own is only one metric. And as you well know, we rely on that kind of measure really to understand and set goals and to measure performance. Are we competitive enough, for example? And a lot of brands have goals. Should they be in the top 5 or top 10 of their category? Should they grow their share of EMV? And those are goals and processes brands should go through. But when the CFO, CEO, CMO is asking, what is it doing to the business? As far as I can tell, there's really no other way to get to those outcome variables except for this multi-stage marketing mix approach.
100%. And I think part of the problem is not only do you have all the problems that we've talked about, but the issue that underlies all of this content is that the vast majority of it is not an ad, right? This is just people talking about the stuff they like, reviewing and comparing different things. So it's going to be 90+% organic content, which will have no trackable links, which will have no discount codes,
Indeed.
which will have no direct connection to revenue.
That's true.
And so if that's 90% of the content, and frankly, I think it's more convincing content generally, I think this is the only solution that I know of to actually solve it.
I think that's fair. I think you've always also taught that when you're trying to drive EMV, you could obviously pay to boost creators' content, but if that happens and that's all you're doing as a brand, you will be seen through as inauthentic. And of course, the creator will actually be hurt from that. So we agree wholeheartedly that the idea of driving EMV is based on organic relationships with the creators. It's a multi-year journey that you have to go on. And so for any brand out here who wants to get started on working with influencers, listen to Conor in every way and make sure that you find the creators who are naturally talking about you and follow them across their journey. I think the other thing that we should get into is what type of creator works well. And you've also taught that it makes sense to have creators at different follower count levels. And we've done a lot of research to say that that's right. And if you focus only on the upper part of that, of creators that have more than 500,000 followers, you can do that. But if you have a mix across each of, let's say, 4 tiers of influencers, that is what drives success. And we recently analyzed one of our brands who made a switch in strategy to a more balanced approach and started to grow their EMV even more than they were before. So making sure that you're working with influencers across the tiers, but also across time is key. And so we agree with everything you've ever said about that topic.
Well, it's been a lot of trial and error. I think the two things I think about there in terms of why that works, right? Why that kind of more blended mix works is, one, you want to build a relationship with somebody before they're big, right? Exactly. So you want to build a relationship early on so that when they do get to be big, it's a more authentic relationship. And they do graduate, right? They do grow at a certain rate. And then the second thing is, and this was a really cool one, we haven't done enough on it recently, but Ryan, our old head of data science, figured out that if you wanted to get a big influencer to talk about you, you needed about 6 people in their network to talk about the brand, and then they would start talking about it. That was the average kind of tipping point. And that's because when they're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and they see a brand, 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 all of a sudden they're like, wait, maybe I should be talking about this, right?
Yeah.
And so actually, unintuitively, the way to get to the big guys is actually through the little guys, right, in some ways. So I'm curious, while we're on this topic, obviously we've seen, influencers and creators continue to gain in terms of headspace within different enterprises. It's been 2 years since we last talked. How have you seen it change both within Estee Lauder and then more broadly?
I would say a lot hasn't changed in that we know that working with creators and influencers is important. What has changed a little bit is the fact that you've got new places like TikTok Shop, which require different types of creators who are driving more bottom of the funnel commerce. What's, let's say, still true is, as we said, creators across the mix. And then what I think we've doubled down on, and that I think is a good idea, is what are enterprise platforms where you can reach those creators at scale using, for example, CreatorIQ to do that, but also how can a brand publish its own content so that it has enough, organic or owned media impressions out there. And so doubling down on technologies like Dash Hudson, for example, have been helpful to make sure that we're putting the content, either UGC that we get from the creators that we like and that are organically talking about with us, or branded content. And those technology shifts, I think, are important. And so for large corporations, investing on one or two platforms has been the change that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of more powerful concepts there that you talked about in terms of taking creators' content and putting it onto your own channels is, today, right, a brand like MAC has a much bigger audience than almost all the other influencers. And so their ability to say, okay, you've got 10,000 fans, I'm going to put you onto my channel, which has X number of millions, you just gained 1,000 fans or 2,000 fans and a bunch of exposure. It's incredibly powerful, right?
Incredibly powerful.
Like we had Robert, the former CMO at Gucci, on, and he's like, I told Vogue, my audience is bigger than your audience now, right? Like, that's crazy, right? Gucci has a bigger audience than Vogue. How does that change the power dynamics or the relationship? So it's a really powerful point of leverage for sure.
Yeah, and I think the brands that do it well are the ones that recognize that it's not just for the brand's sake. They want to cultivate that relationship with that influencer, because typically when that's going to happen, it's that influencer has been thinking and obsessing about the brand for so long that when the brand finally taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, we want to work with you, they're ecstatic, especially if they're on the smaller scale. So as you said before, getting those people while they're young and new and making sure that you appreciate what they've been doing. And you can only do that by having, multi-year relationships with them.
Yeah.
So, not every brand thinks and cares about this. And in many of the large corporations, I see a divergence. So brands like MAC, as you said, or a brand like The Ordinary do that quite well. Brands at L'Oreal do that quite well as well. And then, of course, the indie brands have kind of figured out that that's the path to skyrocketing to sales and to market share improvement. So it's interesting to me that after we've been together as friends for 10 years, that you're still having to educate and teach. So anyone listening to this, just know that the creator economy works, and it's probably one of the most important things you can do. Now, it's not just in the beauty category, and you've been teaching very well that it's expanding to other industries. And I had someone recently ask me, so is there a runway for creators in other industries? And every time I think about that, I think every other industry is experiencing some level of growth because of creators, moving into carbonated soft drinks or moving into alcohol and beer. Professional sports, you've proven that is actually quite a driver. So if people are wondering, is this going to be here for some time, the creator economy, I can vouch for what you say, which is absolutely that's the case.
Yeah, I just think at a very fundamental level, you have to think about how people get information, how they learn about things, right? What are my opportunities to learn about things? I could learn about it from, a publication, which is traditionally how, whether it was a news studio or a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, which there's a lot of validity to that, right? Those organizational institutions. But I think there's something that works very fundamentally when it's like, I am a person, I'm putting my personal reputation on the line by talking about whatever topics I'm talking about. And I might look like you, I might have similar views to you, or I've built trust with you over a very long period of time that the editor at the New York Times might leave, right? They rotate, right? They don't have that same level of professional or personal reputation on the line.
True.
And I just don't see that going backwards. So
I agree. I mean, word of mouth has always been thought of as the way that you drive growth in a business. And what you're describing is the new word of mouth, in that I'm looking not necessarily for my best friend, but I'm looking for someone that I trust, that I've been following for some time as a consumer. And I can believe and trust that when that creator is talking about someone, that it's going to be talking about a brand that I like, that I can actually relate to that, experience that, because they're just like me. And I think that's the power of the creator economy, is it's so many different cuts of that. You could be any person and still find someone that you relate to. I know I personally am in social media all the time. I find creators that I align with, that I think are great. And I do agree that I would follow what they say.
yeah.
So I think the power of understanding that that's the new way word of mouth works is important.
Totally. And I think one of my favorite parts about this whole kind of industry is that in a lot of ways there used to be kind of gatekeepers, right? Like who gets to be on TV and who doesn't. And there were people that made those decisions, and that kept out a lot of differing views about the world. And today, there's no gatekeepers, right? Anybody that wants to can put in the time and effort and build up an audience. And I think that's allowed a significantly more diverse group of opinions and people to be successful, right, in this kind of media landscape. So I love it.
And that whole transformation, has happened in the last 10 years. It used to be that beauty brands in particular were afraid 10 years ago that when a creator talked about them, did that matter? Should we pay attention to it? What happens to the beauty editors and their point of view? And, the brand should know everything about what a consumer should need. And we all know that that's shifted, completely in the last 10 years. I will say, though, there are certain brands that still have reticence towards that. Should they really dial up the working with influencers and creators? And some are a little scared to do that. Each brand is run by a brand steward, and that brand steward should know what's right for the business. So it's true that not every creator is working for every brand the same way, but to not embrace the whole creator economy at this point or at this stage, I think is not good.
You know who's been, I think, behind relative to, there is a massive volume of conversation, but they're very hesitant to be a part of it, is the luxury industry. Not on the beauty side, right, but on the fashion side. It's been surprising to me. So I want to talk quickly about TikTok. So you mentioned TikTok Shop.
I did.
That's getting more and more attention.
It is.
I think generally TikTok has really risen. I mean, it was doing well 2 years ago, but it's really taken up a dramatic share and is clearly the number 2 behind Instagram now. How have you guys thought about your investments in TikTok, as well as your investments in the kind of the different platforms more broadly?
Yeah, I'd say that the TikTok rise has been the major change in how we think about where to choose creators in the last 2 years. I think, though, we can't forget Instagram and its importance. I think the data that we have is about 75% of the earned media value still comes from Instagram. So the way that we think about it is to balance both. But the thing that's interesting is, as we all know, you can't put Instagram content onto TikTok.
Yeah.
It won't work. It has to be a TikTok creator with the right way to get the content to work on TikTok. So it requires a lot more work. It requires a lot more investment. TikTok itself is helping to find creators for brands, but you really have to be careful on who you use and how you use them. Now, TikTok Shop has been, as you said, also quite new. It's only been around for about a year, and when it works, it drives really good sales. You just have to make sure that you're not doing too much of it, in my view, because you want to make sure you're balancing the organic with the commerce part of it. So TikTok, it will continue to rise, I think, but again, let's not go too far out of the way of the balance and make sure that we're looking at both platforms.
Yeah, I think that having kind of all areas of the funnel addressed is the right way to go about it. So I want to do one kind of fun end of show question. So one of the ways that we've bonded over the years was you gave us a lot of really good advice on our safari trip down to Tanzania. I know that you're planning your next one coming up.
I am.
What would be your tips and your advice to those that are planning their trips to have the best experience possible?
I've been privileged to go to Africa twice, going a third time, as you say. The tip is to plan ahead. You need to book anything that you want to do in Africa about a year in advance. And so you're planning maybe 2 years in advance of that. Another tip is to make sure that you're choosing a camp, which is what you call where you stay, in what we'll call a private land. So if you choose a camp that's on public land, you're more restrained on where you can go to see wildlife. When, in other words, you're basically having to be on the roads of a certain place. But when you stay in a camp in a private land, you can go off-road anywhere, and you can follow, a herd of elephants. So one cool thing to see is, hey, there's to the right a herd of elephants, and they look like they're walking this way. And then so you'll go take your vehicle and go, another half mile down the road or down the part of the meadow, and then you'll intercept them, and they walk by just as you're parked. It's incredible. So I know it's a very privileged thing to do, but having vacation experiences like that makes you really appreciate life, I think, and appreciate. If you work hard and you play hard, going to a place like that actually just makes you realize maybe we shouldn't be working anymore.
I've had those realizations. I think, it was my wife's family that took us on that trip, and again, incredibly privileged experience. But also, it makes you realize just how big the world is and how much there is out there.
Indeed.
And it's like, it becomes hard to cope with the fact that you're just not going to see most of the world in your life, right? Which is like as much time and effort as you want to do it. But yet each area of it is so cool and different. The part that tripped me out about Tanzania or about this safari trip that we went on was that when you're in the bus or you're in the car or whatever, you'd have these like open windows or like cracked windows, and you'd see like a lion. Like I could have pet the lion, but they can't fathom that there's something inside the vehicle. They just see it as a single kind of object, and that one made me a little.
It's scary at first. I can relate to that thought. And so the reason why the lion doesn't attack the vehicle is that the aggregate of the vehicle itself is bigger than it, and it knows that. But your human brain can't fathom that, so you're freaking out a little bit when it first happens. And then once the first lion walks by you and doesn't care, then you're like, okay, I'll be safe. It's fine.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, Doug, I appreciate you being only our second repeat guest, and very thankful for our decade of friendship. And
I'm thankful for that as well. Thank you, Conor.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
Okay.
Later, guys.
Be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. Earned by CreatorIQ. CreatorIQ is your all-in-one solution to grow, manage, scale, and measure your influencer marketing program. Ready to unlock the power of the creator economy? Get started with a demo today at CreatorIQ.com.